I was adjusting my hard hat when I entered the Tuesday morning briefing, expecting the usual drill. Safety updates, production numbers, maybe someone complaining about the temperature controls in Building C. I'd worked at Garrison Manufacturing for 13 years, rising from floor tech to operations director. The rhythm of this place lived in my bones. Raymond Parker stood at the front of the conference room, fidgeting with his wedding ring. His suit looked freshly pressed, but sweat beaded at his temples despite the air conditioning running full blast. The other supervisors noticed too. I caught Ember's eye across the table. She lifted one eyebrow, a silent question I couldn't answer yet. Before we dive into weekly targets, Raymond began, clearing his throat 3 times, I want to introduce someone who'll be joining our leadership team. The side door opened. In walked Elijah Parker, 28 at most, wearing designer jeans and a blazer that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. His shoes were spotless, the kind that had never touched a factory floor. He carried a leather portfolio under one arm and wore a smile that suggested he already knew something the rest of us didn't. This is my nephew Elijah, Raymond continued, gesturing like he was presenting a prize. He's got an MBA from Wharton and 3 years of consulting experience. He'll be stepping in as our new director of operations effective immediately. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. My title. My position. The job I'd earned through late nights fixing conveyor systems and early mornings preventing line shutdowns. Given away like a door prize to someone whose hands looked softer than hotel pillows. I'm excited to bring fresh perspectives to Garrison, Elijah said, his voice smooth and practiced. We're going to revolutionize efficiency, implement cutting-edge methodologies, and position this facility for exponential growth. I kept my expression neutral, but my jaw ached from clenching. Ember looked like she might flip the conference table. Leo, our maintenance lead, stared at his coffee cup like it held answers. Elijah continued talking about paradigm shifts and disruptive innovation. Corporate buzzwords that sounded impressive but meant absolutely nothing in the context of keeping machinery running and workers safe. He referenced a synergistic approach to throughput optimization that made me want to scream. Then he said something that made my blood freeze. I've already reviewed the safety protocols and frankly they're excessive. We're going to streamline that process, cut some red tape and focus on what really matters. Output. Safety protocols excessive. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Those protocols existed because 3 years ago, a pressurized seal failed and sent scalding steam across the floor. I'd written those procedures myself, staying up until 2 a.m. to make sure we'd never have another incident. We hadn't. Not one, not in 3 years. Raymond nodded along like Elijah was reciting scripture. I didn't say a word. Not yet. But inside I was already calculating. 13 years of institutional knowledge, and they thought they could just swap me out for nepotism wrapped in an expensive education. Quick note before we continue. Drop a comment with your city or country. I want to know where you're watching from. The meeting ended with polite applause that sounded hollow. Elijah shook hands, working the room like a politician. When he reached me, I stood up slowly. Brielle, right? He extended his hand. I've heard great things. Looking forward to learning from your experience. Learning from my experience. While sitting in my chair. I shook his hand once, firm but brief. Welcome to Garrison. His smile faltered for half a second. He'd expected more warmth, more submission. He didn't get it. I walked out without waiting for dismissal. My boots echoed in the hallway, each step deliberate. Ember caught up with me near the stairwell. That's complete garbage, she hissed. You built this place's entire operational system from scratch. I know. So what are you going to do? I looked at her, keeping my voice level. Right now. My job. Exactly as I've always done it. But that wasn't entirely true. I was already forming a plan, piece by piece, like assembling a machine in my mind. This wasn't about emotion. It was about precision. I returned to my desk. Correction, my former desk. Someone had already moved my nameplate. In its place sat a generic placard that read, Operations Support. Not Director. Support. They'd demoted me without even having the decency to tell me first. I booted up my computer and opened the maintenance logs. Everything looked normal until I checked the timestamp signatures. Elijah's login credentials appeared on 3 separate entries from yesterday afternoon. Before he'd even been officially announced. He'd been in the system, changing things, making improvements to protocols I'd spent years developing. A safety check sequence that required 4 verification points now only required 2. A temperature monitoring system that auto-flagged deviations above 3 degrees now allowed for 5-degree variance. Small changes. The kind that wouldn't trigger alarms immediately. The kind that would create problems down the line when something went wrong and everyone asked why the safeguards failed. I opened a private folder on my external drive and began documenting. Screenshots, timestamp logs, original protocols versus modified versions. I didn't know exactly what I'd need yet, but I knew I'd need something. Around 2 p.m. an email hit my inbox. Subject line, New Operational Framework. Elijah had sent a company-wide message outlining his vision. It was full of graphics that looked good but said nothing. Pie charts showing efficiency gains, based on projections, not actual data. A timeline for cultural transformation that included phrases like agile responsiveness and dynamic workflow integration. At the bottom, in smaller text, all operational decisions will now route through Director Parker for approval to ensure strategic alignment. My decisions, my call signs, my authority, gone. I forwarded the email to my personal account and added it to my documentation folder. That evening I stayed 2 hours past my shift. Not unusual. I'd always been the last one out, making sure everything was locked down properly. But tonight I wasn't checking equipment. I was checking records. The production database kept historical data going back 7 years. I pulled reports on downtime incidents, maintenance costs, safety records, and efficiency ratings. Then I compared them to Elijah's proposed changes. If his streamlined safety protocols had been in place last year, we would have had 4 critical failures instead of 0. The cost analysis was even worse. His efficiency gains on paper would have resulted in equipment damage that outweighed any production increases by a factor of 3. I printed nothing. Left no trail. Just saved everything to an encrypted drive I kept in my locker. When I finally left the building, the parking lot was empty except for 2 vehicles. Mine and a sleek black sedan that probably belonged to Elijah. The lights were still on in Raymond's office. I could see 2 silhouettes through the blinds, one gesturing enthusiastically. Planning my obsolescence most likely. I drove home, grabbed a beer I didn't drink, and sat on my apartment balcony watching the city lights. 13 years. I'd given this company 13 years of my life. Missed family gatherings to fix equipment failures. Took calls at 3 a.m. when systems crashed. Trained half the current workforce from the ground up. And they'd replaced me with someone who thought safety protocols were red tape. Well, this wasn't over. Not even close. But I wasn't going to rage or cause a scene. I was going to be methodical, patient, and absolutely thorough. They wanted me to disappear quietly into a support role? Fine. I'd support them right into understanding exactly what they'd lost. The next morning I arrived at 6:15 a.m. same as always. The production floor was already humming, second shift wrapping up their final checks. I did my usual walkthrough, checking for anything out of place. Line B had a slight vibration in the conveyor motor. Not critical yet, but it would be in about a week if nobody addressed it. I noted it in my personal log, then checked the official maintenance request system. Nothing. Nobody had flagged it. I pulled up the inspection schedule. Elijah had changed it. What used to be daily equipment checks were now every 3 days. Another efficiency improvement that would cost us when machinery broke down from lack of monitoring. I filed a maintenance ticket under my new support role credentials. 2 hours later it came back marked non-priority. Interesting. During the morning briefing, Elijah stood at the front again, this time with a presentation loaded on the screen. Today we're implementing phase 1 of our operational upgrade, he announced. We're reducing inspection redundancies and reallocating those labor hours to production. Ember raised her hand. Those redundancies exist because we're checking different systems. Pressure, temperature, structural integrity. They're not redundant, they're comprehensive. Elijah smiled like she'd asked an adorable question. I appreciate the concern, but modern facilities are moving toward trust-based maintenance. We trust our equipment until it tells us otherwise. Leo spoke up from the back. Equipment doesn't talk. It breaks. Usually at the worst possible time. Which is why we have excellent insurance, Elijah countered smoothly. The cost-benefit analysis supports this change. I watched Raymond's face. He looked uncomfortable but didn't intervene. His nephew had the floor and he wasn't going to undermine him, even if it meant undermining everything we'd built. The meeting ended with more questions than answers. As people filed out, I approached Elijah directly. "Can I see the cost-benefit analysis you mentioned?" He blinked, caught off guard. "It's still being finalized. So it doesn't exist yet. It's in development." His smile tightened. "I don't think you need to worry about strategic-level documentation. Your role is more ground level now." Ground level? Like I was a rookie who didn't understand spreadsheets. "Right," I said quietly. "Just making sure we're all looking at the same data." I walked away before he could respond. But I'd gotten what I needed. Confirmation that his decisions were based on assumptions, not analysis. That afternoon, 3 things happened in rapid succession. First, the vibration in Line B's conveyor motor worsened. It started making a grinding sound that anyone with half a brain could hear from 50 feet away. I submitted another maintenance ticket, this time marked urgent. Second, Elijah sent out another email announcing that all maintenance requests would now require director approval before work orders could be issued. Translated, he had to personally sign off on every repair, every replacement, every adjustment. Third, Line B's conveyor belt snapped. Not catastrophically. Nobody got hurt, thank God. But the belt tore clean through, stopping production on the entire line and scattering product across the floor. The grinding motor had worn through the belt housing, creating stress fractures that finally gave way. I was on the floor when it happened. The sound was like a gunshot, followed by alarms and confused shouting. Workers scrambled back from the line as the belt whipped and coiled like a dying snake. I hit the emergency shutdown, killed power to the entire system and grabbed my radio. "Line B is down. Belt failure. Nobody's injured, but we need maintenance now." Ember's voice came back immediately. "On it. How bad?" "Complete replacement. Minimum 4 hours if we've got the parts." "We do. I'll get the crew." I turned to see Elijah jogging across the floor, looking panicked. Raymond was right behind him, face red. "What happened?" Elijah demanded. I pointed at the destroyed belt. The motor vibration I flagged yesterday wore through the housing. It was going to fail whether we caught it now or tomorrow. "You flagged it yesterday?" "Twice. Both times marked non-priority." His face went pale. Raymond looked like he wanted to melt into the concrete. "I didn't see any urgent flags," Elijah said defensively. "Because you changed the inspection schedule and the maintenance approval process." I kept my voice level, factual. "The system worked exactly as designed." "Your design." Workers were watching now, gathering at a safe distance. Everyone knew what had happened. Everyone knew whose call it had been. Raymond cleared his throat. "Let's get this fixed first. We'll debrief later." But there was no debrief. No follow-up meeting. No acknowledgement that Elijah's changes had directly caused a production line to fail. Instead, at 4 p.m., I received an email from HR requesting my presence for a role clarification meeting first thing tomorrow morning. Role clarification. Corporate speak for, "We need to talk about your future here." I printed the email, added it to my growing file and went back to supervising the belt replacement. It took 6 hours instead of 4 because we discovered additional damage to the motor housing that needed repair. 6 hours of lost production. Thousands of dollars in damaged equipment. All because someone thought experience was optional and safety was red tape. I didn't go home that night until the line was operational again. By the time I reached my apartment, it was past midnight. I was exhausted, covered in grease and angrier than I'd been in years. But I wasn't reckless. I was focused. I opened my laptop and began writing. Not a complaint or an angry letter. A detailed incident report documenting everything that had happened, everything I'd flagged, every change Elijah had made and the direct results. I saved 3 copies. 1 encrypted on my personal drive. 1 in my email draft. 1 printed and stored in my apartment safe. Tomorrow's HR meeting would be interesting. They wanted clarification. I'd give them clarity they couldn't ignore. The HR office at Garrison was small and aggressively beige. Generic motivational posters on the walls, artificial plants that looked dusty, and a desk that seemed designed to make visitors feel small. I sat across from Pauline Yates, the HR director, who kept adjusting her glasses like they didn't quite fit. Raymond was there too, sitting off to the side with his arms crossed. "Thanks for coming in, Brielle," Pauline began, using that careful tone people use when they're about to deliver bad news. "We wanted to touch base about your transition into the operations support role." "Transition," I repeated. "Is that what we're calling it?" She smiled tightly. "We understand this adjustment might feel sudden, but Mr. Parker has brought in someone with specialized expertise to lead the department. Your contributions haven't gone unnoticed, but we need to ensure clear chains of command." "Clear chains of command," I said slowly. "Like the chain where I flagged a critical maintenance issue twice, both times ignored, leading to a 6-hour production shutdown yesterday?" The smile vanished. Raymond shifted in his chair. "That was an unfortunate incident," Pauline said carefully. "But operational decisions are now under Director Parker's purview." Director Parker, who changed safety protocols without consulting anyone who actually works with the equipment. Who reduced inspection schedules against industry standards. Who created an approval bottleneck that prevented urgent repairs. "Brielle," Raymond cut in, his voice sharp. "This isn't productive." I turned to face him directly. "You're right. It's not productive. Neither is replacing institutional knowledge with an MBA who's never worked a day on an actual production floor." "That's enough," Raymond snapped, standing up. "Elijah is family and he's here to modernize operations. If you can't support that vision, maybe you need to consider whether this is the right fit for you anymore." There was the implicit threat. "Get in line or get out." I stood up slowly, keeping my expression neutral. "I've given Garrison 13 years. I've improved efficiency by 40%, reduced safety incidents to near zero, and saved this company millions in prevented downtime. I don't need to consider anything. But maybe you should consider what happens when you prioritize loyalty over competence." Pauline raised her hands. "Let's all take a breath. Nobody's making any decisions today. We just want to ensure everyone understands their role moving forward." "I understand perfectly," I said. "I'm support now. Which means I'll support whatever Director Parker decides, and I'll document every single outcome." I walked out before anyone could respond. My hands were shaking by the time I reached my desk. Not from fear, from restraint. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to march back in there and make them understand what they were doing. But that would have been emotional, reckless, the kind of reaction they'd use to justify everything. Well, I was going to be surgical about this. I opened my email and found a message from Ember marked urgent. "Need to talk. Now." I found her in the break room looking grim. She pushed a tablet across the table toward me. "Look at this." It was Elijah's latest directive, sent out this morning while I was in HR. New production quotas increased by 15% across all lines. No additional resources, no equipment upgrades, just higher expectations. "He thinks we're not working hard enough," Ember said bitterly. "Thinks we've been coasting." I scrolled through the document. It wasn't just quotas. He'd also reduced quality control checkpoints, shortened shift breaks, and eliminated the buffer time we used for routine maintenance. "This is insane," I muttered. "He's going to burn people out and break equipment." That's not even the worst part. Ember pulled up another file. "He sent this to Raymond yesterday. A proposal to outsource maintenance to a third-party contractor." My stomach dropped. "Outsource maintenance? Says it's more cost-effective. Never mind that outside contractors don't know our systems, won't be on-site for emergencies, and will take 3 times longer for anything urgent." I stared at the proposal. It was polished, professional, full of charts showing projected savings. It was also completely disconnected from reality. Has Raymond approved this? Not yet. But he's considering it. I sat back processing. Elijah wasn't just making bad decisions anymore. He was systematically dismantling everything that made Garrison functional. And nobody was stopping him. "What are you going to do?" Ember asked quietly. I met her eyes. "Keep doing my job. And keep documenting everything. That's it. For now." She looked frustrated but didn't push. We'd worked together long enough that she trusted my judgment, even when she didn't understand the plan. The rest of the week played out like a slow-motion disaster. Elijah's increased quotas pushed every line to maximum capacity. Workers were exhausted, rushing to meet unrealistic targets. Small mistakes started piling up. Misaligned components, improperly sealed packages, quality issues that normally wouldn't slip through. The QC team flagged 18 defects on Wednesday alone. Elijah's response was to send an email reminding everyone about excellence standards and personal accountability. On Thursday, Line A overheated. One of the motors ran too hot for too long, and the cooling system couldn't keep up because routine maintenance had been delayed. We caught it before anything catastrophic happened, but the line was down for 3 hours while we let it cool and inspected for damage. Elijah blamed the equipment, said it was old and should have been replaced years ago. Never mind that it had been running perfectly until he eliminated the maintenance schedule that kept it in good condition. Friday brought the breaking point. I was reviewing production reports when I noticed something off in the material costs. We were using 15% more raw materials than we should have been for the output we were producing. That meant waste, inefficiency, or both. I dug deeper, cross-referencing with quality control reports. The pattern emerged quickly. Increased defect rates meant more discarded product, which meant more material consumption without corresponding output. Elijah's efficiency improvements were actually making us less efficient. I compiled the data into a clear visual report. Nothing accusatory, just facts and numbers. Then I walked to Raymond's office and knocked. "Come in." Raymond looked up from his desk, surprised to see me. Elijah was sitting in the chair across from him, laptop open. "Sorry to interrupt," I said. "But I found something in the production reports that needs attention." "Can it wait?" Raymond asked. "We're in the middle of something. It's about material costs and efficiency metrics. Thought you'd want to see it now." Elijah's expression tightened. "I handle efficiency metrics now." "Right. That's why I thought you'd both want to see this." I handed the report to Raymond. He scanned it, his frown deepening with each page. Then he passed it to Elijah, who barely glanced at it before setting it aside. "This is cherry-picked data," Elijah said dismissively. "You can make numbers say anything if you choose the right time frame." "That's 6 months of data compared to the previous 6 months," I said evenly. "And it's consistent across all production lines. Material waste is up, defect rates are up, actual efficiency is down." "Temporary adjustment period," Elijah countered. "Any organizational change has growing pains. Growing pains don't cost 15% more in materials." "Brielle," Raymond cut in, his voice warning. "We appreciate your diligence, but strategic oversight is no longer your responsibility." "Strategic oversight," I repeated. "Is that what we're calling watching the company bleed money?" Raymond's face reddened. "That's out of line. What's out of line is ignoring objective data because it doesn't support the narrative you want." "I think we're done here," Elijah said coldly. "Thank you for the report. I'll review it when I have time." Translation: it was going straight into the trash. I nodded once and left, but not before I saw Raymond's expression. He looked troubled, uncertain. The numbers had gotten to him even if he wasn't ready to admit it yet. Good. That evening, I received an email from Pauline requesting another meeting. This one was scheduled for Monday morning with the ominous subject line, "Employment Status Discussion." They were going to fire me. I leaned back in my chair staring at the email. Part of me had expected this. I'd been too vocal, too resistant, too unwilling to fall in line. They wanted someone who'd shut up and follow orders, and that wasn't me. But they'd made a mistake. Because I'd been documenting everything. Every unsafe decision, every ignored warning, every policy change that violated industry standards. I had dates, times, email trails, and statistical evidence. If they wanted to fire me, fine. But they'd do it knowing exactly what I had on record, and they'd do it with the understanding that I wasn't going quietly into the night. I spent the weekend organizing my documentation. 3 comprehensive files. One focused on safety violations, one on operational inefficiency, and one on direct cost impacts. Each file was meticulously sourced, time-stamped, and cross-referenced. I also researched employment lawyers. Not because I wanted to sue. Lawsuits were messy, expensive, and uncertain. But because I wanted them to know I'd considered it. Sometimes the threat of legal action was enough to make people reconsider their choices. Monday morning arrived cold and gray. I dressed professionally, carrying a leather folder that contained printed copies of my documentation. I wasn't planning to present it unless necessary, but I wanted it close. The meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. I arrived at 8:45 and waited in the lobby watching employees stream in for their shifts. People I'd trained, people I'd worked alongside for years. Some nodded at me sympathetically. Word had clearly spread about where I was headed. At exactly 9 a.m., Pauline's assistant collected me and led me to a larger conference room than before. Pauline was there along with Raymond and another man I didn't recognize. Late 50s, expensive suit, carrying himself like someone important. "Brielle, thank you for coming," Pauline began. "This is Mr. Wallace from our parent company's legal team." They'd brought legal to a termination meeting. "Ms. Maddox," Wallace said, his voice professionally neutral. "We've asked you here to discuss some concerns about your conduct and your fit within the organization's current structure." I set my folder on the table but didn't open it. "What concerns specifically?" "Resistance to organizational changes, undermining leadership decisions, and creating a hostile work environment through constant criticism of Director Parker." I almost laughed. Hostile work environment. For pointing out safety violations and cost overruns. For refusing to accept new management and work within the established chain of command, Wallace corrected. "Your behavior has been documented as insubordinate and counterproductive." "Interesting," I said calmly. "Because I've documented something too." I opened the folder and slid the first page across the table. It was a summary sheet listing every policy change Elijah had made, the date implemented, and the measurable outcome. Wallace picked it up, his expression unchanging. Raymond wouldn't look at it. "These are internal operational matters," Wallace said after a moment. "These are safety violations and regulatory concerns," I corrected. "OSHA mandates certain safety protocols. Elijah eliminated or reduced at least 8 of them. That's not operational discretion. That's liability." Pauline shifted uncomfortably. "We have insurance. Insurance doesn't cover willful negligence. And that's what this documentation shows. Conscious decisions to reduce safety measures despite warnings from experienced personnel." I slid another page across. "This is the cost analysis. Since Elijah took over, material waste is up 15%, defect rates have doubled, and equipment downtime has increased by 23%. These aren't opinions. They're measurable outcomes. Numbers can be interpreted in different ways," Wallace said, but his tone had changed slightly. Less aggressive, more cautious. "Not these numbers. But if you'd like a second opinion, I'm sure any industrial efficiency consultant would reach the same conclusion. In fact, I'd welcome an independent audit." The room went silent. Raymond finally spoke, his voice tight. "What do you want, Brielle?" I met his eyes. "I want you to acknowledge that replacing competence with nepotism was a mistake. I want Elijah's dangerous policy changes reversed. And I want my position restored." "That's not possible," Raymond said flatly. "Elijah is family." "Then I want a severance package that reflects my 13 years of service, a neutral reference, and the understanding that this documentation stays private as long as nobody tries to sabotage my future employment." Wallace exchanged a glance with Pauline. They were calculating now, weighing the cost of fighting versus the cost of settlement. "We'd need to see all documentation you've compiled," Wallace said carefully. "No." My voice was firm. "You get assurances that it stays private, but you don't get copies. That's my insurance that this separation stays professional." Another long silence. "We'll need to discuss this internally," Wallace finally said. "Can you give us until tomorrow?" I stood up. "Take your time. I'll be at my desk doing my job. Let me know when you've decided." I walked out with my folder, my dignity, and the satisfaction of watching 3 people realize they'd underestimated exactly what they were dealing with. The rest of Monday passed in surreal quiet. I worked at my desk, processed reports, answered emails. But everyone knew something had happened. People whispered in hallways, conversations stopped when I walked past. Ember found me during lunch. "You okay?" "Better than expected. I heard legal was in there." They were. And I gave her a small smile. "And now they're thinking very carefully about their next move." She studied my face, then nodded slowly. "You have something on them." "I have the truth documented. Sometimes that's enough." The call came Tuesday at 10:30 a.m. Pauline's assistant. asking me to return to the conference room. This time only Pauline and Wallace were there. No Raymond. Wallace gestured to a chair. We've reviewed your position and we'd like to propose a resolution. I sat down waiting. Garrison will provide you with a severance package of 18 months' salary, continued health insurance for the same period and a neutral reference. In exchange, you'll sign a mutual non-disclosure agreement regarding internal operations and separation circumstances. 18 months. That was more than I'd expected. And the documentation? Remains private, assuming both parties honor the NDA terms. I considered. It wasn't perfect. I'd still be leaving and Elijah would still be running operations into the ground. But I'd be leaving on my terms with resources to land somewhere better, and with the leverage to ensure they couldn't trash my reputation. I want one addition, I said. Wallace raised an eyebrow. If anyone from Garrison provides a negative reference or disparages my professional reputation, the NDA is void and all documentation becomes available for review by relevant regulatory agencies. He didn't like that, but he nodded. Agreed. They produced papers. I read every word twice before signing. When it was done, Wallace shook my hand with professional detachment. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I've seen your work. You're good at what you do. I know, I said. That's why this was necessary. I cleaned out my desk that afternoon. 13 years condensed into 2 cardboard boxes. Photos, a coffee mug from the team, a safety award from 3 years ago. Ember helped me carry them to my car, tears in her eyes. This isn't right, she said. You built this place. I did. But sometimes the building doesn't belong to the architect. What are you going to do now? I loaded the last box into my trunk. Take a week off. Then start looking for somewhere that actually values experience over connections. Stay in touch. Always. I drove away from Garrison Manufacturing without looking back. Not out of bitterness, but because I was already thinking forward. 13 years hadn't been wasted. They'd been training, preparation for whatever came next. The first week of unemployment was strange. I slept late, took long walks, caught up on shows I'd never had time to watch. But by day 4 I was restless. I started researching. Manufacturing facilities in the region, their operational track records, their safety ratings. I made notes, identified patterns, spotted opportunities. One name kept appearing: Xenix Industrial Solutions. Mid-sized operation, growing steadily with a reputation for innovation and worker retention. They'd recently expanded and were rumored to be looking for experienced leadership. I updated my resume, highlighting measurable achievements. 40% efficiency increase. 0 lost time accidents over 3 years. Millions saved through preventive maintenance protocols. The numbers spoke for themselves. I applied on a Tuesday, not expecting much. By Thursday I had an interview scheduled. The facility manager was a woman named Carolyn Reed, late 40s, with grease stains on her work pants and calluses on her hands. She'd come up through the ranks like I had. So, she said, scanning my resume. Garrison Manufacturing. I've heard mixed things about their operation lately. Their operation used to be solid, I said carefully. Recent changes shifted priorities in ways I couldn't support. She looked up sharp-eyed. Meaning they chose connections over competence and cost-cutting over safety. I chose to leave rather than watch people get hurt. Carolyn leaned back. We had a consultant come through last year. Wanted us to reduce inspection frequencies, speed up production cycles. You know what I told him? No. I told him that anyone who thinks safety is expensive has never priced out a lawsuit or a funeral. She smiled. We showed him the door within an hour. I felt something loosen in my chest. Sounds like a smart policy. We think so. Which is why I'm interested in someone who walked away from a job rather than compromise on it. Tell me about your maintenance protocols. The interview lasted 2 hours. We talked about systems, failures, preventive strategies, worker training. She asked technical questions that actually mattered, showed me their floor, introduced me to line supervisors who spoke with respect, not fear. By the end, I knew this was different. Better. I'll be honest, Carolyn said as we walked back to her office. You're overqualified for the position we posted. But I think you'd be a good fit for something bigger we've been planning. What kind of something? She pulled out an organizational chart. We're creating a new role. Director of Operational Excellence. Someone who can oversee not just day-to-day operations but long-term systems development, safety culture, efficiency optimization. Someone who can build something that lasts. She looked at me directly. Think you might be interested? I didn't hesitate. Yes. Good. Let me talk to the ownership team. I'll have an answer by end of week. The offer came Friday afternoon. Director of Operational Excellence, 20% higher than my previous salary, full benefits, and a clear mandate to build programs my way. I accepted immediately. 3 months into my new position at Xenix, I received an unexpected message on LinkedIn. It was from Leo, the maintenance lead from Garrison. Hey Brielle, hope you're doing well. Wanted to give you a heads up. Things here are falling apart. Line failures every other day, safety incidents up, half the senior staff has quit. Raymond's looking desperate. Thought you'd want to know. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me felt vindicated. I'd warned them. I'd shown them the data. They'd chosen to ignore it. But another part just felt sad. Good people were still working there, still dealing with the consequences of bad leadership. I typed back, sorry to hear that. If anyone needs a reference or wants to explore opportunities elsewhere, have them reach out. We're hiring. Over the next month, I received 7 applications from former Garrison employees. I hired 4 of them, including Ember and Leo. They brought institutional knowledge, work ethic, and a deep appreciation for competent leadership. This place is night and day, Ember told me after her first week. People actually listen when you flag problems. That's how it's supposed to work, I said. Garrison's in real trouble, Leo mentioned during a maintenance review. Heard they're facing OSHA fines.